6 Panthers burned in a Norman lane. Their crews never identified the threat. They scanned the hedgerows, checked their flanks, followed procedure, and still they died. The American who killed them wasn't faster. He wasn't better armored. His Sherman was outgunned by every measure that mattered on paper. But paper doesn't account for what happens when a tank disappears into the landscape, when foliage and mud and shadow transform 30 tons of steel into empty air. The German column commander's final radio transmission contained a question that would echo through after-action reports for weeks. Where did it come from? Summer of 1944. The bocage country of Normandy is a killing ground, like nothing the Allied planners anticipated. They expected beaches and plains. They got a maze. Hedgerows tower 8 feet high, sometimes 12. Roots thick as a man's armlock into earthen walls that have stood since Roman times. Each field is a fortress. Each lane is a potential grave. The countryside that looked so pastoral from reconnaissance photographs has become an interlocking nightmare of ambush positions and kill zones. Visibility in the bocage often drops to under 100 yards, sometimes 50. The dense vegetation swallows sound and light. A column of tanks can pass within spitting distance of an enemy position and never know it's there. The terrain doesn't favor offense. It doesn't favor defense either. It favors patience. It favors whoever understands concealment. American tankers learned this lesson in blood. The Sherman was designed for a different war, a war of open terrain and massed armor. In the bocage, those advantages evaporate. The narrow sunken lanes force tanks into single file. The hedgerows block sightlines to under 100 yards. Every corner could hide a Panzerfaust team. Every field could conceal a Panther. And the Panther is a monster. 75-millimeter gun with a muzzle velocity that makes the Sherman's main armament look like a pop gun. Frontal armor that bounces American shells at anything beyond point-blank range. German tank crews call the Sherman the Tommy Cooker. They watch them brew up, the crews burning alive inside. They count kills with the dispassion of factory workers tallying production numbers. The mathematics of armored warfare in Normandy seem to favor the Germans in every category. Better guns, better armor, better optics. A Panther can kill a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman cannot respond. Head to head, the American tank loses every time. But something is changing in the hedgerows. American tankers are adapting. They're learning that the same terrain that makes them vulnerable can make them invisible. A Sherman draped in foliage, hull down behind a hedgerow, engine silent, crew waiting, becomes something the German doctrine never accounted for. A ghost, a trap. One of those tankers is a staff sergeant from Texas with the crew that calls him War Daddy. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. Lafayette Green Poole was born in 1919 on a farm in Odom, Texas. He grew up knowing machinery the way a musician knows instruments, not just how to operate them, but how they breathed, where their limits lay. His father worked the land, his mother kept the house. The Depression ground down families across the country, but the Pooles survived through stubbornness and skill. Poole was tall and rangy with a boxer's build and temperament. At Texas College of Arts and Industries, he studied engineering and won a sectional boxing championship. He could have gone further in the ring. The Golden Gloves National Finals beckoned, but the Army had other plans. He enlisted in June of 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. Poole wanted to be ready. He took basic training at Fort Sam Houston, then shipped to Camp Beauregard, Louisiana, where the 3rd Armored Division was forming up from nothing, from men who'd never seen a tank and machines barely off the assembly line. Poole took to tanks immediately. He understood them the way he understood tractors and engines back home. He could diagnose a problem by sound, feel a mechanical fault through the vibration of the hull. His instructors noticed. They marked him as competent, reliable, the kind of man you wanted in a tight spot. But more than that, Poole understood crew dynamics. A tank is not a weapon. A tank is a team sealed inside a metal box, dependent on each other for survival. Either they function as a single organism, or they die. Poole built his crew with care. Corporal Wilbert Richards as driver, a man Poole called Baby. Private First Class Bert Close as bow gunner, just 17, earning the nickname Schoolboy. Corporal Willis Aller as gunner, steady and precise. Technician 5th grade Del Boggs as loader, fast and tireless. They called themselves the Pups. They called Poole War Daddy. He drove them hard in training. He demanded perfection because he knew what imperfection cost. He made them drill until the actions became automatic, until loading and firing happened without thought. They shipped to England in September of 1943. Poole studied reports from North Africa and Italy. He noted what worked and what got men killed. By late June of 1944, the 3rd Armored Division landed on Omaha Beach. Poole and his crew drove their Sherman inland toward the bocage, toward a kind of warfare that none of their training had prepared them for. The problem facing American armor in Normandy was geometrical. The hedgerows created compartmentalized terrain. Each field was separated from the next by walls that tanks couldn't cross without exposing their vulnerable undersides. The sunken lanes between hedgerows funneled movement into predictable channels. German defenders knew exactly where American armor would appear. They positioned their guns accordingly. Standard doctrine said to advance, to push through, to use speed and mass to overwhelm resistance. In the bocage, that doctrine produced corpses. Tanks climbing hedgerows became silhouettes, perfect targets. Tanks funneling down lanes met anti-tank guns zeroed on the only possible approach. American tankers died in appalling numbers. Some units reported 50% turnover every 2 months. Crews arrived fresh from training, flew 3 or 4 missions, and disappeared. The German defenders understood the terrain intimately. They'd had 4 years to study it. They dug positions directly into the hedgerow embankments. They established interlocking fields of fire. They pre-registered artillery on every road junction. Their tanks waited hull down in concealed positions, engines off, crews patient. But Poole noticed something. He noticed that the same terrain features that made American armor vulnerable could be turned against the Germans. Hedgerows concealed defenders, yes, but they could also conceal attackers. He began experimenting. He found positions where a Sherman could wait, hull down, covered in cut foliage and caked mud, invisible from more than 50 yards. He practiced engine discipline, killing the motor and waiting in silence. He studied the approach routes that German columns used, identified the choke points. It was ambush warfare, patience instead of speed, concealment instead of mass. It required nerve because you had to let the enemy get close enough that even a Sherman's gun could penetrate German armor, close enough that the first shot had to count. Poole's crew adapted. They learned to move at night, to position themselves before dawn, to wait through the hours of heat and silence. They learned to identify German vehicles by sound, and they learned to kill. The engagement that would define Poole's legend occurred in the weeks following the landing. A German column was moving through the bocage, Panthers leading, confident in their armor. The narrow lane offered no room to maneuver. The hedgerows pressed close on either side, towering walls of vegetation that blocked all sightlines beyond the immediate road. The column commander had scouts out, but they were looking for infantry, for anti-tank guns positioned in the open. They were not looking for an American tank buried in the hedgerow itself, shrouded in foliage and mud, indistinguishable from the vegetation around it. Poole had been in position since before dawn. His crew had cut branches and woven them into the Sherman's hull. They'd packed mud into every joint, breaking up the mechanical outline until it looked like nothing more than a dense section of hedgerow. The 76mm gun protruded at an angle that seemed organic, like a fallen branch. Poole waited. He watched the lead Panther approach through a gap in the leaves. His crew was silent. The engine was cold. The Sherman was invisible, a shape that didn't register as a threat because it didn't register at all. The range closed. 200 yards. 100. Poole's gunner had the shot aligned. 75 yards. The Panther's flank was exposed. At this range, even the Sherman's gun could punch through. Poole gave the command. The gun fired. The shell punched through the Panther's side armor and detonated inside. The German tank lurched, stopped. Smoke poured from the hatches. Before the second Panther could react, before its turret could traverse, Poole's gunner fired again. Another hit, another kill. The German column was trapped. The lane was too narrow to turn. The hedgerows blocked escape. Poole's crew worked through them methodically, shot after shot. The engagement lasted minutes. By the time silence returned, 6 German tanks were burning. Poole's Sherman remained hidden, unfired upon, untouched. The surviving German crews who made it out of the kill zone could only report what they knew. They had been hit from somewhere. They didn't know where. They had searched the hedgerows and seen nothing but vegetation. It was as if the shells had materialized from empty air. Where did it come from? The question appears in German after-action reports throughout the Normandy campaign. It reflects a fundamental failure of doctrine. German training emphasized armored warfare as practiced on the Eastern Front and in North Africa. Open terrain, massed formations, tactical maneuver at speed. The bocage was different. The bocage rewarded patience over aggression, concealment over firepower, the first shot over the fastest tank. German crews were trained to fight tanks. They were not trained to fight ghosts. Poole's tactics spread through the 3rd Armored Division. Other crews began adopting his methods. They draped their Shermans in foliage. They used mud to break up the outline of their hulls. They positioned themselves in hedgerow gaps and waited, engines off, for German columns to blunder into their sights. They learned what Poole had demonstrated, that the Sherman's weakness in head-to-head combat became irrelevant when the enemy never got a shot off. Kill ratios improved, losses dropped. The bocage remained deadly, but it was no longer exclusively deadly for Americans. In 81 days of combat, Poole and his crew were credited with 12 confirmed tank kills. But that number doesn't capture the full scope. They destroyed 258 armored vehicles total, including the half-tracks, assault guns, and self-propelled artillery. They killed over 1,000 German soldiers. They took 250 prisoners. They led the point in 21 major engagements. They crossed France and Belgium, always at the front, always hunting. 3 different Shermans bore Poole to battle. Each was named In the Mood, after the Glenn Miller song. When asked why, Poole said it was because that's how he felt, in the mood for anything. The first lasted 6 days before a Panzerfaust knocked it out at Villiers-Fossard. Poole and his crew bailed out unharmed and immediately demanded a replacement. The second lasted until mid-August, when a friendly P-38 Lightning mistook it for a German vehicle and destroyed it. Again, the crew survived. Again, they demanded another tank. They were back in action within days. At Diesen, Belgium, Poole's column came under fire from a Panther. Poole ordered his driver to advance. Upon reaching the head of the column, he spotted the enemy tank at 1,500 yards. His gunner, Olla, put an armor-piercing round through it with a single shot. Poole calmly resumed his place in the lead. The advance continued. German prisoners interrogated after engagements described their confusion. American tanks that appeared from nowhere, shells that arrived without warning from positions that seemed empty. German crews began to hesitate, to see threats in every shadow. That hesitation cost them seconds. In armored combat, seconds cost lives. Poole's war ended on September 19th, 1944. His third Sherman was advancing near Münsterbusch when a German Panther caught them in an ambush. The irony was bitter. The master of concealment was caught by a concealed enemy. The first shell hit in the mood in the flank. Poole's driver tried to reverse. The Panther fired again. The second shell caught the Sherman on the edge of a ditch and flipped it. The impact threw Poole from the commander's hatch, tearing through his leg with shrapnel so severe it had to be amputated above the knee. His replacement gunner was killed. The rest of the crew survived. Poole crawled from the wreckage with his combat career over. 81 days, 12 tanks, 258 armored vehicles. One question that German crews would ask for the rest of the war. Poole returned to the United States. He served as an instructor, passing on the lessons he'd learned in the hedgerows. He was recalled to active duty in 1948, served with the 3rd Armored Division at Fort Knox, and retired in 1960 as a chief warrant officer. He married, he raised children, he lived quietly in Texas. He didn't boast about his record. When people asked about the war, he gave short answers. The men who served with him talked, though. They told stories about War Daddy, about the crew that appeared from nowhere and killed with impossible precision. The lessons spread through the armored force, became part of the institutional knowledge that shaped American tank doctrine for decades. His crew gave him the nickname that would inspire Hollywood, War Daddy. When the 2014 film Fury depicted a Sherman tank commander played by Brad Pitt, the character was drawn from Poole's legend. In the 1980s, Poole visited the 3rd Battalion, 32nd Armor at Fort Hood. The unit had descended from his old regiment. The colonel invited him to speak to the soldiers. Poole told them the same things he'd learned 40 years earlier in the bocage. Position matters more than armor. Concealment matters more than speed. The first shot wins. Patience kills. Lafayette Poole died in his sleep on May 30th, 1991. He was 71 years old. His obituary mentioned the Distinguished Service Cross, the Legion of Merit, the Silver Star. It mentioned his record as the American tank ace of aces. It did not mention the question that defined his legacy. The hedgerows of Normandy are peaceful now. The fields are planted with crops. The lanes carry tractors instead of tanks. Few venture into the bocage. Few understand what happened there, but the lessons survive. They're encoded in training manuals around the world. The principle that Poole demonstrated, that concealment can defeat firepower, that patience can defeat aggression, that a well-positioned defender can destroy an advancing column before the attackers even identify the threat, remains fundamental to armored doctrine. The Sherman is gone now. The Panther is a museum piece. The men who fought in the bocage are nearly all gone. But the question endures. In every after-action report where a unit was destroyed by an enemy they never saw, in every ambush where concealment trumped firepower, where did it come from? Poole knew the answer. It came from patience, from observation, from understanding that the terrain itself could be a weapon, from the willingness to wait, silent and hidden, until the moment was perfect. It came from a farmer's son in a machine that was supposed to be outmatched, from a crew that trusted each other with their lives, from a staff sergeant who turned the weakness of his tank into a strength no German doctrine had accounted for. 6 Panthers burning in a Norman lane. Their crews never saw what killed them. They scanned the hedgerows. They followed procedure, and somewhere in the vegetation, invisible, patient, a Sherman that had become part of the landscape held fire until the range closed. Then it spoke, and the Panthers died. Where did it come from? From the mind of a man who understood that in war, as in life, being unseen is sometimes more powerful than being strong, that waiting is sometimes more deadly than attacking, that the smartest move is not always the boldest. Sometimes it's the one that makes your enemy ask a question they'll never get to answer.